Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News, and in the wake of the Imola Grand Prix, as George Russell pulls away from Mercedes teammate and 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton, is Hamilton considering right now behind the scenes that maybe he should have just retired after last season? Very much intrigued your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Lots to dive into today. Number of Grand Prix since last one too thought was kind of interesting. Red Bull of course got one in Imola for the first time since Malaysia 2016. Ferrari of course got one not too long ago. Italy 2020 was McLaren, like no other 1-2 was actually had last season in 2021 other than McLaren of all teams, Mercedes back in 2020, and then Williams, Alfa Romeo. It's been a fairly long time for those teams, the others of course not achieved one as of yet. This also just to mention real quick on Charles Leclerc, right, Nico Rosberg, he's definitely been saying some statements this past weekend. We'll look at what he had to say about Lewis Hamilton here in a second. Basically just saying though to Charles Leclerc, like look, he cannot afford to make these mistakes. Verstappen is just too consistent to let that happen, right? He had a P3 yesterday, pretty much signed, sealed and delivered, let it go, spins off the track while trying to attack Perez, and will chase the fastest lap effectively, ends up P6. That's 7 points he lost. Of course, he looked at it from a more positive perspective, as in, he could have had a worse performance, right? He could have been out of the race, still managed to salvage some points, but of course not as ideal for Ferrari as this weekend could have been. This has been mentioned though, because Red Bull certainly brought some upgrades to this weekend. I think there were a few aerodynamic tweaks they made that they seem to be very happy with. Also, they lost about 10 kilos or so, and they believe they can lose another 5 to 10 kilos over the coming races effectively. Ferrari didn't really change all that much on the car. They say there's an updated aerodynamics package coming in for Miami, and then a larger one I believe is coming in Barcelona. So definitely over the next few races. We also believe their updated power unit, the second power unit they have, which I believe is on Sainz's car right now, but definitely will be on Leclerc's car, probably from Barcelona or Miami or something along those lines, does have another pretty much 10 horsepower in the back pocket. So that's kind of where they're going to try and make the gap up on the pretty spectacular car that Red Bull had this weekend. Is it track dependent? Of course, that's a question, and maybe we will find out. But of course, look, Ferrari on the whole have had a much better start to the season than Mercedes have, pretty much taken all the points away from what Mercedes had, well, comparing last year's season 2021 to this year, of course. And well, this is Russell versus Hamilton, right? A kind of surprise to start off the season. Russell now extending his advantage over teammate Lewis Hamilton, right? Early on, it was Hamilton P3, P4. They got in Bahrain. Since then, though, Russell's kind of taken the advantage. And honestly, his consistency over the first few races has been very admirable indeed. He does have a few words to say here on Hamilton. Before we look at that, though, this I thought was pretty remarkable. Mr. Saturday becomes Mr. Consistent. 4th in the Bahrain Grand Prix, 5th in Saudi Arabia, P3, P4. Since then, right, the only driver so far to have placed top 5 or P5 or better in every single race so far this season. Impressive stuff, no doubt, from George Russell. But look, he's a good PR guy. He's not going to say, oh, Lewis, he's really struggling right now. I feel like I've got the upper hand on him, this type of stuff. He's going to say, look, I expect him to come back strong. I know the way he's pushing, motivating the team, very inspiring. I know I'm not getting comfortable, right, being ahead of him, because I know what he's capable of. And it's an interesting spot that Lewis finds himself in, really, because now he's pretty much given up on his championship hopes he said a few days ago, obviously not fighting for the championship, which is very clear at this point. Seems like it is going to be a Leclerc versus Verstappen battle this season for the title, but now he's kind of written that off. In a way, maybe that reduces the pressure on him to a degree. Of course, look, there's still a lot of pressure and a lot of eyes on Hamilton right now, but anything better than where he's been the last few races is going to be a positive sign. And you can certainly look at a few things that were unlucky for him this weekend. The timing of where the DRS came through, like the poor pit stop he had, right, that lost him a few places. If he gets past them, for example, if the DRS comes in a couple of laps earlier, Gasly hasn't caught up to Albon, he probably gets Gasly with the DRS, gets Albon. The race could have been very different for Hamilton, but at the end of the day, you've got to think about the fact that, look, Hamilton did in qualifying and in the sprint race underperform where he could have been, at least in terms of what George Russell was doing, right? Yes, Russell was only a little bit further up the road, but he had some advantage on him this weekend, right? And if Hamilton was as quick as Russell was, then he might have not been putting in this position, right? And as Nico Rosberg said, of course, won the World Championship alongside Lewis Hamilton back in 2016, I guess it was now, but pretty much the only time he beat him, right, when he was at Mercedes. But I kind of wondered if you're Rosberg, whether you kind of go down the route of being like, okay, yeah, Hamilton is the greatest driver ever, he never makes mistakes just because it makes you seem better. But I do appreciate the honesty from Rosberg. Let's not forget that Russell's in P4 with that same car that Wolff was calling undrivable on the radio. So Lewis definitely had a big role to play in that poor result this past weekend. And Sky Sports were definitely trying to get an answer here from Helmut Marko as to what Hamilton might be thinking, what's going through his head. And Helmut Marko, of course, chief advisor to Red Bull, basically says, look, Hamilton might be thinking right now behind the scenes, and in his ear while he's driving the race, sitting behind that Alfa Tauri in the entire race yesterday. Maybe he should have just stopped last year, right? Of course, he had full confidence the team would deliver a good car. They obviously haven't got it right, and now he's thinking, well, how many more seasons do I really have? Hamilton doesn't necessarily need F1. He could step away if he wanted to. He certainly considered it after last season, right, when he took a lot of time off, whether he wanted to come back. Obviously, he wanted to come back, get revenge. That's seemingly not going to happen this year, and unless the team can turn it around quickly, he might well think about retiring and, packing it in really at the end of this season, and maybe get something that's already on his mind that he kind of made a mistake to continue.
What do you think is going through Lewis Hamilton's mind right now?
I mean, he was left by us, so I don't think. Maybe he should have stopped last year. He's thinking. Maybe.
But as I said earlier, it's possible now that the fact that the championship is pretty much out of reach takes the pressure off to some degree, and I do feel like he's got relatively unlucky in terms of the way the situations have worked out so far, and the car is obviously capable of doing something decent in George Russell's hands, and yeah, the fact that Hamilton hasn't really matched that yet is obviously pretty surprising, right? So he's going to have to turn it around. Only 4 races in, 19 to go. Hamilton has that crazy record of winning a race in every single season that he's participated in, like 15 years, I believe, in a row now. Schumacher, I believe, also ties the record with Hamilton on 15, so whether that will continue with Hamilton, whether he'll be able to surpass that. He already has a podium this season, right? Can he go one better? Probably going to take some other crazy stuff to happen at the front with the Red Bulls and the Ferraris taking each other out, or Mercedes to actually rapidly improve their car. This was also said by Christian Horner, though he kind of incorrectly, well, maybe a Freudian slip or so, talked about Hamilton being an 8-time world champion before saying, okay, yeah, actually, it was Rosberg that won one of those 8 during the kind of constructors' dominance that Mercedes have had the last 8 years or so. Certainly, seemingly not going to be the case this season, though. But of course, like, he hasn't forgotten how to drive. It's got to be remembered that at the end of last year, Hamilton probably had one of the greatest individual performance streaks of those few races towards the end of the year that we've really ever seen in Formula 1. Like from Brazil, yes, of course the car was great. That is a factor in consideration here. But Brazil, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and then even Abu Dhabi, all the way until 59 or whatever. He performed impeccably, right? And obviously he made some mistakes earlier on in the season, but Hamilton seemed like the best driver on the grid for those few races. And that's only a few months ago, right? So it's not like he's forgotten how to drive by any means. Maybe he needs a bit more time to get used to this car, and of course, if the car changes, it might suit him a bit better. It's kind of early in the season to tell, but the fact that the championship is pretty much out of reach is obviously a big deal already. Wolff says the following: we want to protect Lewis. It's not like he's at a low point, the car is just at an all-time low. Lewis is the best driver in the world, but he doesn't have the equipment to show that at the moment. Of course, well, you can look at what Russell's doing and maybe beg to differ on this issue, but it kind of makes sense at what they're saying, at least to the public-facing eye right now. But you do have to wonder what Hamilton's thinking behind the scenes, because seems like pretty downbeat and deflated, really, this entire weekend. Understandably so, but the frustration may well be getting to him behind the scenes, especially when you've been dominating for so many years and now you're stuck behind an Alfa Tauri in P14. It's not going to be playing particularly well on your mental, to be honest. Now, well, look, Mercedes do have some plans in the works to unlock quite some lap time, they believe, and if this doesn't work, they're going to have to come up with another idea. So this is what Toto Wolff has to say. Effectively, they believe updating the aerodynamics to reduce the bouncing is going to be the key to this car. They reckon that the bouncing issues, the porpoising issues, causes so many other issues within the car itself that they just can't solve all of their problems. It all really comes from the bouncing. That's what they think. Of course, we look at the Ferrari, they can still kind of get away with it seemingly, but the Red Bull does seem to be, when it drives around, the most poised car on the grid, the most aerodynamically sound car on the grid, and that's of course the car that looked fantastic this weekend. So that's probably the thing that these cars are going to have to get on top of. And it's also frustrating to watch, right? We want Formula 1 to be the pinnacle of motorsport, and we have to watch these cars bouncing around on the straights. It just looks ugly, to be honest. That's just my perspective, at least. They do have some other plans to make this work if they don't get on top of it with whatever floor upgrade they're going to try and bring in. They have some more conventional development paths, which may even include, right, the fact that they have the no side pod design. What if they go back to the side pods they had in Barcelona testing? That would be practically admitting defeat, and they'd have to do loads more research even at that point to make that work, but it might be something that's on their mind right now if whatever upgrades they bring over the coming races don't work with their current design. But they're kind of still ambitious that this can work. We've seen what Russell has done, really. They've already got a podium. Hamilton and Russell both got a podium so far this season in obviously fortunate circumstances, but the car is capable of not being too far behind the Red Bulls. They just need to find a little bit, even though they've had a few shocking performances, of course, mainly with Hamilton in the car. And speaking of the porpoising, there was actually this that George Russell pointed out, that this weekend especially was pretty much the worst he's had it within the car, and maybe just due to the track, the kind of pretty bumpy straight actually towards the end of the pit straight anyway, but saying that he was actually struggling with back and chest pains during the race due to the extreme porpoising. Not sustainable for drivers, he says, effectively, so they certainly need to get on top of that. The Red Bull, I think even they've been suffering from it a bit. I'm pretty sure they said that the damage it caused was actually what caused Verstappen to retire in Australia. But watching these Mercedes especially bounce around on the straights, they're just smashing the underside of the car into the floor. You've got to think at that point really that it's going to do some damage, right? So there's not just to the drivers, but also to the drivers themselves. It's something that absolutely 100% have to get on top of, and so far haven't really been able to do so, right? But of course, it is a very much a long season ahead of us. This is also pretty crazy, actually, a rare Grand Slam feat. It's very rare indeed that two drivers have had a Grand Slam. So this is pole position, fastest lap of the race, led every lap lap and of course won the Grand Prix in a weekend. Charles Leclerc did that in Melbourne last weekend in Australia. Verstappen's just done it here. It's pretty crazy, right? Because we thought the idea was, okay, these regulations make it easier to compete, make the racing better, like a more mix up at the top, and we kind of have seen that. But at the same time, like two different drivers back to back. I'm pretty sure maybe the first ever back-to-back Grand Slam by two different drivers. Maybe like Sebastian Vettel probably had one back in 2013 or something as a single driver. But the last time two different drivers have had one in the same season was actually back in 1979, and neither of these guys actually won the championship that year. So I wonder if it's a similar story this season, but it seems relatively unlikely, to be honest. And of course, Miami is just around the corner, May 6th through the 8th. I would very much enjoy your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new as always, take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.